when they're looking at their characteristics, generally they're also looking at medians. Meaning that, you know, in their A1 ratings, they would have, you know, they may look for median fund balance of 20%, which means that they may be, you know, anywhere from 18 to 25.
Right. And depending on your other strengths, you could be on the low end, or you may have to be
Right,
on the high
and you
end.
may, right, and you may be, and they'll look at a number of variables, which is why I asked what our outlook was, because if it's a positive outlook, then there are some things that they're looking at as counterbalances to some of the pure mathematical formulas. If it's a negative outlook, that means that your mathematical formula is probably going to be a little stronger. If it's neutral, it means they're sitting on the fence and they want to see what you come back with, but whatever. Okay. Now, when you talked about fund balance, when the '06 budget was passed, there was an element in it of about $350,000 that was set aside out of fund balance to keep the tax rate at 0. As you're looking at, you know, your budget projections through the end of '06, are you expecting that we're going to be using that 350?
No.
Okay, so that we can roll forward into the '07
I'm not,
budget.
yeah, I'm looking at hopefully not using the fund balance at all and just looking at actual revenues and expenditures.
Because that was part of what was set aside as a designation, as
Correct.
reserved as a designation at the end of '05. So that designation's still there.
Correct.
And when we look at our budget, is it purely just the general fund? Do we exclude the water, sewer, and
If
section
we're
8
gonna-
housing?
No, actually,
If we're gonna move these, if we're gonna move.
I'm glad that you mentioned the water fund, because normally that isn't a, you know, a high-profile fund, but things are different here in Peekskill in the last couple of years with the construction of the water filtration plant, and you've increased your debt burden substantially. You have a pretty nice, or had a pretty nice fund balance at the end of 2002, percentage-wise much greater than what you had in
You
the,
meant 2006.
pardon?
You said.
Well, at the end of 2005, you had like $2 million of free fund balance.
You said
Two.
2002.
Oh,
So I
2002.
couldn't even tell me what happened 4 years
I was
after
thinking
that.
2 million, and I.
Yeah, I know there's 2 million.
The 2 million, and percentage-wise, that's probably 40–50% of this year's budget, which seems unusually high, and perhaps is, except for you're just entering into this program, you just sold the bonds, debt service will begin to kick in 2007. Another issue in 2007, I think it was the winter pool.
Spring pool.
Spring pool in March, so you'll be taking on another 10 to 14 million. I think you're listed for 14 on their,
I think we
on
bought
their
in
intended
10.
use program, but,
10 and 11.
yeah, okay, all right, so it'll be a little bit less, so.
And going back to Ossining, since you compared Ossining, Ossining went through the same situation when they built a new filtration system also. And it's amazing, their budget right now with the new filtration plant is almost very close to what our budget's gonna be with our filtration, close to $5 million. And that's Ossining's water fund also. And their fund balance is about $2 million also. It's amazing how close we are between our and Ossining.
But I
But
think,
ours includes a fairly healthy contingency, our water fund budget.
Correct. And that contingency again can hopefully offset the debt service for next year for the 2008 when we go to the next funding round.
Right, because when you look at that $5 million operating budget, that assumes, if I remember, it's somewhere between $300,000 to $400,000 contingency, $200,000 for capital, and $573,000 as a transfer to the general.
That's correct.
So you're basically pulling out close to $1 million. So
300,000.
you're operating.
But the contingency sits in the fund balance but not used, and then that
It's
can be
in your
used off the
budget.
debt. Yes.
But
And
it's in
that-
your operating expense budget.
Correct,
the
and that
contingency.
contingency not used, it could go into fund balance,
I agree.
that'll offset the debt service.
So I think our operating fund balance is a little smaller than ours. You know, because you're also looking at $200,000 that you transfer to capital, but yet if I look at the 5-year capital plan, I don't see a heavy keep the filtration plants on the side,
Right.
but you know, the other equipment and kind of stuff we
Mhm.
fund through the capital budget.
Which is something that would be nice to do with the general fund, because they're actually purchasing equipment versus going out the debt on. I don't think the water has gone out the debt in years. The last time we borrowed any money for the water it's been years. since we
Long
borrowed
time.
money.
Right, but even looking at what's approved for spending out of the capital plan, it's pretty small. I mean, there's a number, well, one of the things you did say you were gonna give us was the roll forward of the capital projects accounts. So when I look at '05, there's a number of what look like water fund related capital projects with reasonable size unexpended fund balances. And so, at the end of '05, so where they stand at the end of '06, and I'm trying to look at the 5-year capital plan, and the concept that we've been pulling $200,000 a year for capital transfers out of the water fund, putting it into the capital fund, but I don't see them being spent at the same rapid rate.
Yeah, some of it was for the filtration plant, some of it was for replacement of water lines and sewer lines, meter replacement, and the meter replacement program continues on. But
Well, the sewer should be from the sewer fund.
no, yeah, meter replacement for the meters in your house for the water meters, yes.
My only point though is, I mean, I think our operating budget for the water fund is smaller than Osnet's operating budget when I start to factor out some items that we don't seem to be spending in the same year that we set the monies aside. That's all. Plus, yep, that $5 million is also including the close to $600,000 you're planning to take out and put in the general fund.
Yeah, I think it's
573. So I mean, that's like, that's 10% of what the operating budget would be, which isn't gonna be used for water fund related things, it's just,
And again, that's a policy decision. So if you don't have to, then you have to increase the general taxes to make up the difference.
we don't necessarily have to increase the general taxes.
And we're going to do that, yeah, we're going down.
And the other point of the matter is, we've been doing it for a long time, so the reserves that you would have already had to deal with the bond issue costs in the water fund, so you wouldn't need to increase water rates, is sitting in the general fund balance. Because to the extent you moved the $5 million a year over, except we didn't do it for '05.
The 500,
And
yes.
whether you're moving it for
Yes.
'06 or not, but whether you're moving it
This
for
is really
'06 or not, I still don't know.
Stimulating.
But
We
to
don't
the,
know yet.
okay, but to the extent that you move $500,000 or so over from the water fund to the general fund, and then we create a general fund surplus, we're basically not using the water fund money to stabilize taxes, we're putting it into a fund balance. So we've taken it from the water fund balance to the general fund balance. We've done that over a number of years, so now when we're looking at the bonds coming online, we actually don't have the extra couple of $1 million sitting in the water fund to deal with the debt service payments over time. But it still looks like, at least when you looked at the 6-month report, you were still expecting a surplus in '06 in the water fund. So it's not like our water fund is break even, we do have a surplus. And that's one of the challenges in trying to project forward what our fund balances are gonna be in any given year,
And that's
in
what's a
setting
good
the
idea.
fund balance policy.
And that's what's a good idea by having a policy set up that we
Yeah,
all
I
agree
agree.
to, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, I think just one other thing on the water fund in terms of the overall impact on the credit rating. Moody's will go through these debt burden calculations. Essentially, what they're looking for is tax-supported debt, where you raise taxes to support the debt. That is not the case in your water fund. As long as it's self-sufficient and generates a surplus year in and year out, then they will give you credit for that, reduce or net that out with your burden, reduce those ratios. So that is a positive as well, aside from the operational benefits and effects of doing something like that.
Which ratios would they reduce?
Well, it would be the debt burden ratio, direct, net. Well, actually, the more important one is the net. It would stay in the gross debt, but it would be taken out as a credit for determining net indebtedness. Now, under state law, you get that credit automatically, so when you prepare a debt statement for whatever purpose, bond issues, you're allowed to take that credit, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's self-supporting debt, because there are some communities that do, at least in part, fund water operations with assessments or benefit assessments, which are akin to tax assessments. They're not ad valorem, but nonetheless closer to that than a rent, I guess. So those would be out of the calculation.
And in looking at the size of our operating budget in terms of calculating a fund balance, is the Section 8 fund in
No.
or out?
Totally independent.
That's out. And
Because that's
so-
all funded by the federal government.
I know, but when it could artificially, if it adds $5 million to, even though it's an in and an out, if it adds $5 million to,
No, Moody's look at that section, because everything's in.
I doubt it. I mean, that's
No.
basically a wash. I mean, the real focus is
Is
the
the
general
general
fund,
fund.
because that's the security for the bondholders.
right, okay.